Vladimir Putin will have a final say on how Russia responds to the expulsion of diplomats from 14 EU member states as well as the United States today, a Kremlin spokesman said. Dmitry Peskov said Putin's response will be based on the principle of reciprocity, meaning Russia is likely to respond in kind and turf out European diplomats in the country. EU Council President Donald Tusk revealed unprecedented coordinated show of defiance to the Kremlin over the Salisbury attack at a press conference in Bulgaria today. Germany, France, and Poland each expelled 4 diplomats, which Lithuania, Latvia, and the Czech Republic also took action. Ukraine, not an EU state, joined the European revolt by expelling 13 diplomats. Separately, the United States is expelling 60 Russians over the attempted assassination of Sergei Skripal as Moscow is frozen out of the international community. Canada followed suit by expelling 3 Kremlin staffers. Russia's ambassador to the U. U.S.Anatoly Antonov denounced the U.S. move as ill-considered and provocative, and said in remarks carried by Russian news agencies that Moscow will make an adequate response. He said Monday that the U.S. is ruining what is left of Russian-U.S. ties, adding that Washington will bear responsibility for the consequences. Britain led the way in the aftermath of the March 4 attack by expelling 23 Russian diplomats from London. The Kremlin kicked out 23 Britons as a reprisal. Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson hailed the largest collective expulsion in history and said it would help defend our shared security. Johnson called the expulsions an extraordinary international response by our allies and showed that Russia cannot break international rules with impunity. A spokesperson for Prime Minister Theresa May said she welcomes the action by our allies, adding that it demonstrates we stand shoulder to shoulder in sending the strongest signal to Russia that it cannot continue to flout international law. Russia's foreign ministry slammed the provocative expulsions and vowed to respond in kind. Announcing the coordinated action, Mr. Tusk said, last week the European Council condemned in the strongest possible terms the recent attack on Salisbury. The European Council agreed with the UK government assessment that it's highly likely the Russian Federation is responsible and there is no plausible alternative explanation. And we decided to recall the EU ambassador to Russia for consultation.As, a direct follow-up to last week's European Council decision to react to Russia within a commons framework. Already today, 14 member states have decided to expel Russian diplomats. Additional measures, including further expulsions within the EU framework, are not to be excluded in the coming days and weeks. We remain critical of the actions of the Russian government. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko said his decision to expel 13 diplomats was taken in the spirit of solidarity with our British partners and transatlantic allies and in coordination with EU countries. Following the expulsions, Mr. Johnson said, "Today's extraordinary international response by our allies stands in history as the largest collective expulsion of Russian intelligence officers ever and will help defend our shared security." Russia's foreign ministry made clear it would respond in kind. A statement said, "The provocative gesture of solidarity with London by these countries, who have bowed to the British authorities in the so-called Skripal affair and did not bother to understand the circumstances of what happened, is a continuation of the confrontational path to escalation." Britain's allies are blindly following the principle of Euro-Atlantic unity, to the detriment of common sense, the norms of civilized international dialogue, and the principles of international law. It goes without saying that this unfriendly act by this group of countries will not go without notice, and we will react to it. Downing Street said today Mrs. May had received a very positive response from allies in Brussels last week. The expulsions were expected after the Kremlin denied a claim that Skripal wrote to Vladimir Putin asking to be pardoned and to be able to visit his home country. The former Russian intelligence officer, who came to Britain in 2010 as part of a spy swap, regretted being a double agent and wanted to visit his family, his friend Vladimir Timashkov told the BBC. Mr. Skripal and his daughter Yulia remain in a critical condition after they were poisoned with the highly lethal nerve agent Novichok in Salisbury on March 4. Moscow has stepped up its campaign to discredit Theresa May's assertion that it is highly likely Russia was responsible for the attack. The diplomatic crisis has plunged relations between Russia and the UK into the deep freeze and could trigger further action by European Union members in support of the Prime Minister's stance. But the Russian embassy in London kept up its attempts to challenge the UK's case, reiterating its suggestion that the Portsmouth Defence Laboratory was developing its own military-grade poisons. The lab, located less than 10 miles from Salisbury, is where tests were carried out to identify the Novichok substance. Portsmouth Chief Executive Gary Aitken had told the BBC, "We have got the highest levels of controls of security around the work that we do here." "We would not be allowed to operate if we had lack of control that could result in anything leaving the four walls of our facility here." A Russian embassy spokesman said Mr. Aitkenhead's comment amounts to admitting that the secret facility is a place where new components of military-grade poisons are being researched and developed. Russia has vehemently denied any responsibility for the incident, while on Sunday Vladimir Chizhov, Russia's EU ambassador, said that from the legal point of view the Russian state had nothing against him, Mr. Skripal. The 66-year-old was accused of working for MI6 over several years, in particular disclosing the names of several dozen Russian agents working in Europe. He was sentenced to 13 years in a high-security prison in August 2006, before being freed in the 2010 deal which saw 10 Russian sleeper agents expelled from the United States. According to Mr. Timashkov, his friend, who he had known since school, did not see himself as a traitor as he had sworn an oath to the Soviet Union. Many people shunned him. His classmates felt he had betrayed the motherland, he said. In 2012 he called me. We spoke for about half an hour. He called me from London. He denied he was a traitor. He told me he wrote to Vladimir Putin asking to be fully pardoned and to be allowed to visit Russia.